Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Kissing Darkness, the Dark Spells series, Book 5 by Isra Sravenheart, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Samuel rushed into his office, clutching a lukewarm mug of coffee in his left hand. The man had already experienced a chaotic morning, having the metaphysical chimes practically ringing in his ears from those on high, but the Lightbringer was exhausted. Just imagine his surprise, thinking he was alone, only to be met by the solemn glance of Astrid. "Ah, boy, I wondered where you were. Do you like slightly warm coffee? I can't say I recommend it too highly," Samuel chirped, grimacing as he took a sip. "I'm not here for the sanctimonious refreshments, Samuel," Astrid countered, clearly pissed at Samuel. But why he was upset Samuel had no inclination of. Could it be that the dear friend of Astrid had offended the poor raven, or did he have his feathers in a twist over something else? Or perhaps someone, a certain femme fatale he was rather fond of. Well, it could be that. "Yes, well, I'd rather have a fresh one, but there's just no time, you know. So much to do," Samuel jested, swigging the rest of the coffee that was now stone cold. "That is vile, indeed." The Lightbringer spluttered, pulling a face of disgust as he looked upon the raven favorably. "So, do tell me, what brings you here in such a dander, It's not your time of the month, is it?" Samuel noted the raven was situated a little farther away from him than usual today. "How strange. He's normally so chatty. I typically cannot get the bastard to shut up." Samuel motioned to himself in thought as he realized Astrid's temperament was very different this morning. Slightly brasher than usual. "Actually, I've just come back from witnessing Isra give up her heart to darkness," Astrid replied, clearly not beating around the bush. His tone was icy, but yet pungent, as if surrounded by ferocious flames that were not about to cease any time soon. "Oh, that," Samuel murmured. "Do tell me, what is going on? I'm afraid I'm a little out of the loop." Astrid resisted the urge to throw out a sarcastic comeback, having already been told to steer clear of Isra more times than he cared to count. But Samuel was clearly unaware and wasn't about to discipline the raven for filling in the blanks, or at least that was how Astrid hoped it would be. "Never mind, he knows nothing. I'm the guy who gets told in no uncertain terms to get out of there, and yet they don't know a damn thing. Utterly ridiculous." Astrid thought quietly to himself, regarding how the On High was dealing with the intrepid situation. "Isra and her foe Everilda are at war with each other," Astrid began in a stern tone. "I've witnessed it for myself. Isra is vengeful and out for blood, whereas her opponent—" Astrid stopped mid-speech for fear that whatever he said now would get him into a lot of hot water. After all, he wasn't supposed to be within cloth's distance from the witch. But evidently, Samuel had no clue of what was occurring, so better to say what needed to be said now than later, right? What was the worst that could emerge from such a thing? Astrid doubted not much, as he'd already caught sight of enough tormenting things already. "Everilda," Astrid continued, "was a witch, but now is mortal thanks to the gracious folk over at Wingdom's who saw to it." Samuel almost spat in horrendous shock. "You have to be joking, surely. You mean to tell me that our witch has a foe that is now mortal? Ordained by the very academy we've had our eyes on for months? Where the fuck is James?" Samuel shouted in frustration, banging his fists upon his desk. "Oh no, this is too much for a morning. I need a shot of whiskey. I can't handle this," Samuel snapped, reaching for his decanter eagerly. "And why did the On High not tell us?" he quizzed the raven with a forewarning glance. "That I do not know, but it's sure to get a lot messier from here on out," Astrid predicted in a somber tone. "Touché. I must get in touch with James immediately. Someone needs to go down there, assuming she's still out there causing all manner of havoc," Samuel muttered, almost cursing to himself as if he should have been on the ball. He should have been the first to intervene the very second Isra switched from light to dark. "I should have fucking been there. I've been following this woman since we first heard about her existence, as well as that energy that was surging through her, sending ripples across the earth as she walked in desolate desperation. I've been reprimanding Astrid for being within arm's length of her, and here she turns the tide, and not even in the vicinity to do something about it. Oh, I'm an absolute fool." Samuel clashed back and forth within himself. "Why, James?" Astrid asked in a low voice, although there was some kind of irritation that Samuel detected in Astrid's tone. You could just tell that Astrid really resented James in some form or of another. The way he spoke regarding James was callous, as though he'd rather James wasn't there, because the way Astrid saw it, James was treading upon his carefully raked soil. Astrid did not feel very appeased to that. He'd already threatened to peck James' eyeballs out once, and perhaps if there wasn't some moral justification from Samuel as a result of taking such extremes, maybe Astrid would have by now. But no, he'd have to sit there and tolerate this human, or whatever James was, being involved as much as Astrid disliked him. Because James has experience with witches, Samuel reluctantly came back to Astrid. He has the know-how and forward planning on how to deal with them in an efficient manner. How lovely for him. What a novel way to go about your married life by dealing with witches, as you so ambivalently put it. Astrid scoffed in a sarcastic yet stroppy tone. Yet again, the raven was indicating he was far from happy to hear of James's involvement with the mission at hand, even though Astrid had no physical ability to intervene in regards to Isra. Don't start, boy, Samuel chided the raven with a harsh, burning stare, having listened to much of Astrid's ranting already. The On High has been communicating with me most of the morning. It's gotten pretty rough down there. Perhaps someone should go down personally and intersect with Isra, as apparently things are messy. Samuel added with a furrowed brow. Oh, and let me guess, that someone is James, Astrid snapped back. He started to preen his feathers, busying himself with that task, almost ignoring Samuel in a sense. It was as though Astrid felt like something vile had tainted his silky black feathers, and he was frantically trying to remove it. Perhaps he was just being an ignorant bastard, as he suspected Samuel would answer him with yes. No, Samuel responded with a sharp tone. He veered in closer to the raven, lifting him onto his shoulder so he could speak to him more intently and actually look into Astrid's eyes. This was really the personal touch into Samuel's eyes, the best course of action to get this raven to listen to him for a change. You really have no comprehension of what's kicked off, do you? I've heard from my wise associates that Isra hasn't just given up her heart to the dark. No, she's done a bit more than that. I mean, if you had been around her since this morning, you'd have known for yourself just what she has unleashed into our world. Samuel spoke in a serious yet withdrawn voice. The Lightbringer was extremely tired, and it had already been a rough start to the day. He had a feeling it was about to get worse. Astrid relented, only giving his master a sympathetic look. After all, Samuel was rather invested in the mission to tease Isra away from the darkness. He didn't look well thinking about it. Samuel looked pale and lifeless in the face. His normal sky-blue eyes that closely resembled the ocean were lackluster, and his eyelids puffy. All that coffee had not helped Samuel claim some finesse back from his non-existent sleep. Clearly there was more to this mission, this fight against the dark shadowy realms that Samuel was not letting on to. It was something that could only be so deeply painful to make him so embroiled in the life of one witch, fated for something much more gratifying than anyone could have conjured up for her. However, Samuel was not surrendering. He would prevail because this was a lifelong devotion. It was fickle for anyone, even Astrid, to think that one setback would cause such a domino effect that would make him give up on a cause he truly believed in. No, Samuel was made of far stronger stuff than to just give in at the first hurdle. He'd play along with Isra, doing things her way if he had to, in order to get her to see the real reasoning of things. If he had to, he'd play dirty. Samuel was no stranger to wicked trickery, especially if it meant he'd overcome the demons by cavorting with them just to make them think they had succeeded in bringing damnation. Astrid was startled as, all of a sudden, with a glint in his blue eyes, Samuel shifted him off of his shoulder with a concerned look. I suppose, if there is to be any positive resolution in this, I will have to take this matter into my own hands. The Lightbringer chirped with a wink, snapping his fingers together as if he had just come up with the plan of a lifetime. The smile that was just about visible signified that Samuel would indeed find a way.